The world of horror is a cruel, cruel beast when it comes to the unfortunate characters who find themselves terrorized and tormented by whatever particular threat is rearing its sinister head. Whether it's miffed ghosts, the shuffling undead, savage creatures, or one of the plentiful other familiar big bad tropes, the villain of the piece is forever out to kill off all who get in its way. Whilst there's usually a victim or two who survive these movies, there are those rare examples where the crazed presence at the centre of a picture does the unthinkable and actually succeeds in slaughtering each and every one of its targets. So, with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are horror movies where no one survives. Inbred. Receiving its premiere in 2011 before a low-key release the following year, British horror film Inbred is definitely a picture that will stick with you long after its 90-minute runtime is up. Is Inbred particularly great? Well, that's questionable. What makes this Alex Chandon-helmed offering stand out, though, is it's brimming with gratuitous, gruesome gore. Even now, over a decade since its release, Inbred remains a surprisingly jarring watch for those who've chosen to revisit it. Plot-wise, the movie centres on 4 troubled youths who are taken to a small Yorkshire village to carry out community service under the supervision of their 2 caretakers. But soon enough, the group find themselves not exactly welcomed with open arms by the locals of the area. As it turns out, the residents of said village like to brutalise any visitors in spectacular fashion. By that, it means that outsiders are kidnapped and then used as part of a creepy stage show put on by the locals for the locals, with such shows ultimately resulting in the death of these star attractions. Whether it's by chainsaw, gun, trampled by a horse, or even force-fed literal excrement until you burst, all 6 of Inbred's protagonists wind up dead. House of a Thousand Corpses. Rob Zombie's directorial debut, House of a Thousand Corpses, infamously introduced the world to the Firefly family. A clan of twisted, murderous sorts, the Firefly crew would of course go on to cause chaos and carnage for a further 2 movies, with even their purported demise at the end of The Devil's Rejects not slowing them down enough to stop them rearing their heads once more in 2019's 3 from Hell. As House of a Thousand Corpses opens up, the attention is on 4 friends travelling cross-country in order to pen a book on the most unique roadside attractions and events. Upon hearing from Captain Spaulding about the twisted legend of Dr. Satan, our buddies venture off to learn more about this sinister figure. Unfortunately for them, damage to their car means an initially warm stay at the nearby home of the Fireflies. By the end of Zombies' 2003 offering, the 4 friends become merely just another few notches on the Firefly family's bloody bedpost. For Bill, he's killed and sculpted into a fish boy. Mary is erratically, fatally stabbed by Baby. Jerry is tortured to death by the aforementioned Dr. Satan, and poor Denise is maniacally hunted down by the Fireflies before she's last seen being operated on and presumably killed by Doc Satan. Unfriended. For every positive of social media, there are a handful of negatives, all usually due to the usual sort of idiots who have to ruin things for everyone else. In 2014's Unfriended, it's Facebook that's in the crosshairs, as a group of high school pals all end up dead by the time the picture rolls to a close. To set the stage, poor Laura Barnes took her own life after a video was circulated on Facebook of her drunkenly passed out and having soiled herself. Skip ahead a year and the friends involved in recording Laura are now seemingly haunted by her spirit. Being a tech-driven horror film, these hauntings actually play out through Skype chats, with Laura exacting revenge from beyond the grave and tormenting her supposed BFFs. By the time the penny drops that the mysterious murderous Billy227 Skype user really is somehow the presence of Laura, it's too late for our core cast of teens, with them all winding up dead via bleach, blender, gunshot, and a curling iron shoved down the throat. Best of all, Laura then uploads the truth of this entire situation to Facebook herself, as the film ends with this miffed spirit lunging towards the camera. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Beginning has one of the great so near but so far final kills, with Leatherface appearing in the backseat of an escaping car to slice up Chrissy. As a movie, The Beginning is bang average at best, but with the slaughtering of Chrissy, Leatherface had finished his job and made sure that the picture had 0 survivors. This 2006 prequel picture details how Thomas Hewitt became Leatherface, and the film opens with an early death as Thomas's mother dies while giving birth to the future chainsaw enthusiast. From there, the now adult Tommy kills his boss before then getting the chance to carve up 5 pretty young things by the time the beginning wraps up, the last of these being the aforementioned Chrissy. Away from that, Leatherface also manages to kill off a couple of cops as audiences got to see Thomas Hewitt blossom into the butcher poster boy of the Texas Chainsaw franchise. As of this recording, Leatherface has been seen to have killed a total of 55 people, and the beginning was the picture that first gave us a glimpse at the Maniac's formative years. 2001 Maniacs. A loose remake of a 1964 movie that was inspired by a 1940s musical, Tim Sullivan's 2001 Maniacs is a great little popcorn horror flick. Set in the Georgia town of Pleasant Valley, this picture finds 6 college kids and a few bikers stumble upon said town just as the annual Guts and Glory celebrations are taking place to pay tribute to the American Civil War. In reality, the 2001 Maniacs of the title were the 2001 Confederate soldiers killed during that war, and Pleasant Valley itself is actually a cemetery site. After all but 2 of our protagonists are slaughtered in some truly gruesome ways, the reveal of Pleasant Valley's truth is made once those 2 survivors manage to make it out of the town and to a nearby sheriff's office. There, the duo are informed that Pleasant Valley no longer exists and that the site is nowadays a graveyard. Rightfully freaked out, our heroic pair pile onto a motorbike and drive off into the sunset, only to then be decapitated by a well-placed slice of barbed wire. With that, every one of this 2005 movie's key characters are nicely killed off. The Diatlov Pass Incident. From director Renny Harlin, as in the helm of the likes of Die Hard 2, Deep Blue Sea, Cliffhanger and A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, the Diatlov Pass Incident is loosely based on the real-life deaths and disappearances of 9 hikers in 1959. In regards to the loosely based angle here, Harlin uses these disappearances as the launching point for a film that goes utterly nuts and throws time-traveling mutants into the equation. Also known as Devil's Pass in some markets, this 2013 film focuses on 5 modern-day American students who head to the snowy Russian mountains where the events of '59 reportedly took place. Desperate to unravel the truth behind this mystery, 3 of the group wind up dead during the early goings of the picture, and the remaining duo then encounter the aforementioned mutants. Trapped in a minuscule bunker, the pair of Jensen and Holly have screeching beasts outside their door as a strange wormhole appears in their tiny temporary safe haven. Left with no choice, the 2 opt to step through the wormhole and end up sent back to 1959. As a result of this time traveling, Jensen and Holly have mutated as the realization kicks in that they are indeed the exact same mutants who had been stalking their future selves in the present. So yeah, the Diatlov Pass Incident is definitely a weird one from Renny Harlin. Cabin Fever. While some critics pandered Cabin Fever as a stereotypical horror film that treaded too closely to humour, it deserves to be respected as a darkly comic homage to low-budget horrors and gory bonanzas that came before it. You know when you're watching a film by Hostel's Eli Roth that things are going to get bloody and get bloody fast. The film follows a group of college teens escaping the stresses of college life by spending spring break in a remote cabin in the woods. I mean, who needs beaches when you can have desolate horror cabins? As they enjoy their holiday of debauchery, an infectious disease carried by a tainted water supply is being spread by less than accommodating locals and eventually between the survivors. One by one, each of the cabin goers is taken out by this infection that appears to be sexually transmitted. By the finale, only drunken coward Jeff remains, who had hidden and drank off screen for a solid portion of the movie. Perhaps the only final death on this list that audiences found satisfying, and initially devastated but now celebratory Jeff is dispatched by the corrupt sheriff. Meanwhile, the townsfolk begin to sell lemonade and a truck filled with tainted water drives away, leaving us to pessimistically think who will be infected next. The Final Destination series. Final Destinations 1 and 2 must be disqualified as there are a handful of survivors canonically left alive by the time the credits roll. Luckily, these films follow exactly the same 3-step plot. Protagonist has vision, vision saves most people, death is pissed. Where the variety and most definitely the watchability comes from is both the different initial deadly disaster and the various ways death rights the wrongs. In the final 3 movies, the disasters are a gnarly rollercoaster crash, an insane NASCAR pileup, and a terrifying bridge collapse. Meanwhile, each film's survivors are saved by the clairvoyance of Wendy, Nick, and Sam, respectively. In extremely entertaining fashion, one by one, the survivors are killed by natural accidents. Heavy emphasis on the term natural here. Such as car crashes, botched eye surgery, and a rogue lawnmower and stone. However, the cherry on top of this ridiculously extravagant death cake is that when each group of final survivors think they've outplayed death, they are proved very wrong. Firstly, the remaining rollercoaster crew are thrown mercilessly from a runaway subway cart. Next, our NASCAR buddies are hit by a massive truck while sipping coffees. And finally, our bridge brigade board the same flight that crashes to start off the franchise. No one cheats death. Quarantine. So here's the thing with this entry. Quarantine and its Spanish predecessor Rec are essentially the same film in 2 different languages. Because of this, the original Rec is the superior film. However, for those that want to watch a horror film without having to translate, Quarantine is a more than adequate English counterpart. Both are harrowing found footage films that get progressively more chilling, but for this list, Quarantine has the advantage of leaving no survivors. Both films follow a camera crew and their subjects, a firefighting station, as they are called out to an emergency in an apartment building, and once they find themselves there, are locked inside before they can complete their job. Once there, they slowly but surely find the apartment building ravished with infected, rabid residents who want to infect and kill anything in its path. One by one, the fighters, crew, and remaining residents are taken out, all whilst Angela and her cameraman film in shocked horror. Eventually, they are cornered in the penthouse building by a spine-tingling creature that butchers the cameraman, and in the film's final shot, drags a sobbing Angela to her demise. 28 weeks later. For years, there have been whispers that Danny Boyle's stellar duology of The Infected would become a trilogy. Many beg that day to come, but until then, 28 weeks later remains the final entry in the series. In fashion with the series, Boyle gives us a disturbing ending of hopelessness to round off an enthralling film. For the first half, 28 weeks later follows Robert Carlyle's Don, a survivor forced to leave his wife and friends behind in the hope of sanctuary. Perhaps the most intense start to a movie ever, where all but Don dies, should have given everyone a clue for what was to come. But hindsight is 2020. Eventually, Don is reunited with his children and his wife, perplexed but grateful about her survival. Yay! Well, the yays stop here, sadly. Don's wife is a carrier, and one kiss later, Don is infected and brutally beats his tied-down wife to death. The perspective switches to the young 2 children, who are forced to flee with military members played by Rose Byrne and Avengers' own Jeremy Renner, whilst old Papa spreads the infection through the quarantined London. Hawkeye is burned alive, whilst Byrne is beaten to death with her own gun, whilst Don is eventually shot by his own daughter and the siblings are flown to safety. The final shot shows an empty chopper and an overran Paris. Bleak isn't strong enough a word. The Blair Witch Project. For those just now experiencing the horror genre, you will never truly understand how innovative and ingenious the Blair Witch Project was at the turn of the century. Whilst horror was largely going down a campy, self-aware route thanks to Scream, Blair Witch offered fans the found footage genre, where the experience felt real and terror and paranoia were at the top of the agenda. The frightening flick follows 3 friends, Heather, Josh, and Mike, who, like in Paranormal Activity, were played by themselves, hiking through a creepy forest on the hunt for local legend, the titular Blair Witch. Though things start out innocently, soon things go bump in the night and the crew lose all sight of their bearings. Josh is suddenly lost, and following hearing his screams, Heather finds fragments of Josh, including his shirt, teeth, and tongue, by a tree. With one down, it was just a matter of time before the duo would become separated. They once again follow Josh's screams to an abandoned house. Have they learned nothing from horror movies? And Mike is attacked off-screen. When Heather finds him, Mike is standing facing the wall, possessed in what has become an iconic shot in horror history. Heather resigns to her fate, recording a farewell before being attacked. Never track a witch, kids. Dawn of the Dead. When Zack Snyder watched the original Dawn of the Dead, you can just imagine him saying, "It's good, but I wish it was more badass." In 2004, Snyder and James Gunn brought that vision to life with an awesome, action-packed and quirky zombie extravaganza. The story mainly follows Anna, who goes from timid nurse to final girl material in record time. Snyder right away showed he'd be pulling no punches by doing a truly rare trope in horror movies, killing a small child. The first zombie we see is an adorable little girl who adorably rips Anna's husband's throats out with merciless power and ungodly speed that will make you jump every single time. It appears Snyder saw shambling corpses and once again went more badass, leading us to some of the most terrifying zombies on the big screen. Eventually, a group forms within a shopping mall and after realizing they can't stay there, turn buses into deathmobiles and head out to the docks to ride Steve's boat off into the sunset. Obviously, things go awry and after chainsaws, zombies, explosions and secret zombie bites, we are left with a small pocket of survivors. However, just when you think they're safe, the credits turn to found footage, which shows the survivors out of gas, pulling up to an island crawling with zombies. There is no way they're getting out of that one.
Night of the Living Dead, 1968. Night of the Living Dead is filmmaker George A. Romero's revolutionary horror masterpiece. It's the film that changed how horror was seen and made, and its influence on horror cinema is still prevalent to this day. A group tries to take shelter in a farmhouse and end up fighting for survival as the dead begin to rise. The movie is over 50 years old, but it remains an incredibly influential one. It was the first time a horror picture was led by an African-American actor, and it was one peppered with socio-political commentary. But it's the shocking way in which the film ends that made audiences gasp. Ben, the last survivor of the zombie hordes, leaves the farmhouse for supposed safety and is shot by armed men after being mistaken for a ghoul. The Crazies, 2010. Whilst you can argue that the 2010 remake of The Crazies isn't quite a zombie movie, the actual concept and structure certainly makes it feel like one. Based on the 1973 George A. Romero movie of the same name, this 2010 effort deals with a small group of survivors attempting to work together to escape the town and the Crazies. Structurally, it has all the hallmarks of your typical zombie experience, except here the infection isn't passed through bites. It's ingested thanks to a weaponized biological agent that's accidentally found its way into the town's water supply. Unlike other similar movies where the survivors escape and leave behind a location still filled with the infected, The Crazies features a nuclear bomb being dropped to destroy the town and hopefully all remnants of the agent. Timothy Oliphant and Radha Mitchell's surviving couple is seen walking away towards a new city when the film ends. That is, until a satellite spots them and the chilling on-screen text suddenly reads, "Initiate containment protocol," basically sealing the pair's fate. A mid-credits news report sequence also shows footage of soldiers battling with the infected in the aftermath of the explosion. Rec 3 Genesis. Rec 3 is the third installment in the Spanish found footage horror franchise and acts as both a prequel and a parallel to the original two movies. Also, surprisingly, it's the first in the franchise that suddenly decides to switch to traditional filming about a third of the way into the movie. It's Coldo and Clara's wedding day, and the celebrations are abruptly interrupted when an infected veterinarian, which connects the movies, becomes aggressive and starts biting the other guests. It's a blood-soaked affair, and Coldo and Clara, now infected herself, share one last kiss before they're gunned down by police outside the venue as it becomes the subject of a quarantine. Pet Sematary, 1989. When the Creed family move into their new home in Ludlow, Maine, they were probably hoping for a lot less reanimation. After the family cat is killed on the highway outside their home, neighbor Judd suggests that family patriarch Lewis takes it beyond the pet cemetery near their property and buries it in an ancient Native American burial ground. He does, and the following day the once dead cat arrives back at the home alive, but not quite right. Later, the young Gage Creed dies in a horrific accident on the highway, and Lewis, against all warnings, buries his son in the same place. Gage returns with malevolence and kills both the neighbor and his mother. Lewis fights off his reanimated son, finally injecting him with morphine to kill him, and he takes his wife's body to the cemetery to bring her back. She obliges and in her undead state comes back and stabs Lewis to death as the screen goes black. Ponty Pool. In 2011's Canadian horror Ponty Pool, we hear a lot more than we see. The town of Ponty Pool has been quarantined. The French transmission, once translated, instructs listeners to stay indoors and to avoid using the English language and other certain phrases. This is discovered to be the source of this strange virus, and all those who hear it are changed. Grant discovers that by manipulating language, you can control it and help anyone infected, even helping to reverse the symptoms altogether. However, the local authorities have different plans and decide to blow up the radio station to prevent any further spread. Later, it was confirmed by news reports that the quarantine was a failure and the virus just kept on spreading. The movie plays out like a bottle episode of a TV show, and it's a very creative way of telling a zombie-themed story, and one which you can imagine the apocalyptic nightmare sitting just outside those doors. Day of the Dead 2, Contagium. The oft-lambasted Day of the Dead 2, Contagium was a direct-to-video effort from co-directors Anna Clavel and James Duddleson. It was confusingly marketed to the general public as both a sequel and a prequel to that of George A. Romero's 1985 zombie threequel Day of the Dead, despite having nothing to do with the original film whatsoever. A group of patients and their doctor discover a strange thermos buried out in their hospital yard. Once opened, it releases a deadly virus into the building, turning the infected into flesh-starving ghouls. Contagium is a movie built with low-budget run-of-the-mill zombie action, and by the movie's lackluster conclusion, almost everyone in the hospital has been infected, bar a few survivors. Some of the already infected try to pressure these survivors into turning themselves, but with a suicidal sacrifice, the last man standing makes it impossible for him to become one of the living dead, stating that, quote, "In the end, the only way to truly defeat death is by the act of dying."
Dead set. If you were told that there was a zombie TV series taking place on the set of Big Brother without knowing about Dead Set, you would probably think it was some sort of dark comedy in a similar vein to Shaun of the Dead, right? Well, as it turns out, Dead Set is not only super intense, but also incredibly depressing. The show was always full of brutal and nerve-wracking encounters with the undead, but the series finale managed to crank its levels of brutality to the absolute maximum. The series ends with the mansion being overrun by the zombie horde, which kill every single character you've grown to love or care for over the course of the show, one by one. The scene where hero Kelly convinces Space to let her out of the diary room, hoping to make a run for it only so that she can get immediately swarmed by the horde, is so shockingly bleak. It goes to show you how hopeless their fight for survival was from the very beginning. And to add more salt to your tears, the final shot of the episode shows zombie Space and Kelly looking at each other through the camera. Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass is a captivating horror story about the isolated community of Crockett Island, which begins to experience all kinds of supernatural phenomena after the arrival of a mysterious priest. The show's finale is fiery and gruesome, but also oddly heartwarming, and not just because of the flames. By episode 7, the entire population of Crockett Island has either been killed or turned into vampires, save for the few survivors who want to prevent the monsters from ever leaving the island. Father Pool's flock falls under the control of the fanatical Bev, who wants to burn down the island, but leave the church and the recreation center to shelter the vampires from sunlight. The survivors try to destroy the buildings, but ultimately fail and get killed. Their sacrifice is not in vain, however, as it awakens something in the undead congregation that quickly turn against Bev. Consequently, the people burn down the church and the rec center and then prepare themselves for the upcoming sunrise, singing in unison. In the end, only 2 kids, Lisa and Warren, survive the island's destruction by escaping on Warren's boat, and their departure means that Crockett Island will forever remain an empty and destroyed ghost town. Shiki. In terms of its premise, Shiki shares a few similarities with Midnight Mass. Both shows are about isolated communities becoming breeding grounds for vampires, and both of them end up with their communities being burned down completely when the tensions between the living and the undead reach their climax. But the main difference between the shows is that here, the show actually tries to make its audience sympathize with the vampires a little bit. The townfolk turned into the titular Shiki are shown to have retained most of their human qualities, and they appear to only just want to survive in this world, just like the rest of the town. This is why when the Shiki's existence becomes exposed and the humans decide to kill them all, the carnage that ensues hits the viewer especially hard. Pretty much every single scene during the burning down of the town of Sotaba shows its vampiric citizens getting staked, burned, and even tortured by their own family members. At the end of the final episode, we see Saishin and Tsunako driving away from the carnage. Though they make it out of the town with their unlives, the town's destruction is a clear sign that they can never escape humanity's wrath. Strangers from Hell. Strangers from Hell is a brilliant Korean thriller about a young man living in a dormitory with a cast of strange neighbors, all of whom seem to be hiding a dark secret. The show does an amazing job at portraying the issues of modern Korean society, exposing the pressure it exudes on its poor and destitute members, all while delivering a truly tense and disturbing story with a twist that is sure to blow anyone's mind. The story of the main character, Yoon Yong-woo, was bound to end with murder and death, but no one expected that it would be him who would be killing his creepy neighbors. Well, to be fair, the show was building up to this moment, leaving plenty of clues as to why he would become an unhinged killer. We see how much he is struggling with his past and how nobody in the present seems to treat his concerns seriously, and this is why ultimately he falls for Moon Yo's brainwashing, and why he ends up killing the psychotic dentist along with his neighbors. The show pulls off an incredible twist by revealing that it was the protagonist that was the killer all along, all the while delivering an important but very disturbing message. Terror Season 1. The Terror is a brilliant retelling of the tragic events of the Arctic expeditions of the HMS Terror and HMS Erebus, which mixes the real-life events of the expedition with supernatural occurrences to create a one-of-a-kind psychological thriller. Now, those that have watched the series finale might say that when compared to the historical events and the novel, the show's kill count is actually missing one person. After all, the captain is shown to be alive in the final shot. However, given the narrative of the Terror and how it showcases that the British explorers' arrogance and trust in technology ultimately led to their demise, the new life to which the captain adapts to after all of his crew is gone feels like a death scene all its own. As the sole survivor of the tragedy, the captain acknowledges the error of his and his men's ways. He ultimately chooses to abandon his old life, and the final scene is meant to show you that what was left of him gave way to a completely different man. And the words of the translator in the final scene only confirm this, which are, "Tell them we are gone." Supernatural. Supernatural is a cult dark fantasy television series that aired for a whopping 15 years, and although it certainly lost much of its initial fear factor throughout its incredibly long lifespan, it certainly didn't diminish its fans' attachment to the main cast. And after 15 seasons and 327 episodes, the series finally came to an end in 2020, delivering an incredibly emotional conclusion to the story of Sam and Dean. By the end of the series, all of the Winchester family are gone. Sam and Dean's relatives have long since fallen victim to demons that they were fighting, and eventually Dean suffers the same fate. Well, he actually died several times throughout the show, but this one somehow managed to stick with him permanently. Dean gets impaled by a vampire, leaving Sam distraught. Eventually, however, Sam learns to move on and starts a new family of his own. At the end of the final episode, Sam is old and on his deathbed, and when he finally draws his last breath, we see him appear in heaven to finally reunite with his brother. Death Note. It shouldn't come as a surprise that in an anime like Death Note, the main cast of characters didn't really have a huge chance of surviving. If there's one message that the show has tried to highlight the most, is that every choice has its consequences. Now, Death Note follows the life of Light Yagami, a brilliant young man who, after acquiring the titular Death Note, which allows him to kill anyone whose name is written into the book, becomes a justice-obsessed vigilante known to the rest of the world as Kira. Throughout this series, Light comes across many people trying to expose him as Kira, including his arch-nemesis L, and acquires a handful of allies to help him carry out his mission. By the end of all things, all of his allies are 6 feet under, and Light shares their fate shortly after, as the Death God who he's been using like a puppet uses the Death Note against him. Right up until his very last moment, Light believes he's outsmarted everyone, but his death immediately shows him that in the end, he was really just a puppet of more sinister forces. Light dies alone, and his legacy dies with him. Shortly after his death, his last remaining companion, his fiancée, is seen standing on the ledge of a building, implying that she's about to kill herself. American Horror Story Murderhouse. Now, the early seasons of American Horror Story are where the show was truly at its peak. The first season, Murderhouse, set an alarmingly terrifying tone for the entire series, in fact. Murderhouse follows the story of the Harmons after they moved to Los Angeles. They're trying to get a fresh start after a traumatic miscarriage, but much to their continued dismay, their lives change only for the worse. The family has to deal with hauntings, violent break-ins, and plenty of murders as their whole world slowly falls apart. By the end of the season, all of the Harmons are dead, their souls forever trapped in the Murderhouse. Their family of ghosts decides to act as guardians of the house to prevent any more deaths from happening there. And at that point, you could think that the Harmons' fate is maybe not so bad, especially seeing as they are even shown happily celebrating Christmas together. But unfortunately for them, even death couldn't keep them away from Tate. On top of that, the only thing that's left of their time in the house is a literal spawn of Satan. So yeah, one to avoid on Airbnb, that one.